This episode of Church Advance is brought to you by ServeHQ.Church. You know, Bryan and I have worked and talked with many pastors over the years, and one of the common biggest frustrations that they're experiencing is getting volunteers prepared and feeling that frustration of them being unsure with what to do. They'll spend hours each week trying to train new people, but there's always a lack of consistency, and it winds up burning many leaders out. Well, that's where Serve HQ can really help. With easy online training, built-in accountability, and automated reminders, your team will now be better trained, more confident, and more engaged, without you having to do any of the heavy lifting. If you've ever struggled to get your volunteers trained and ready, check out Serve HQ today at www.servehq.church. That's www.servehq.church.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Church Advance Podcast. Luke, good to see you. And here we are at the tail end of the summer. Everybody's getting geared back up for school and all those exciting things. And we're certainly excited around here about the pre-release, pre-sale of Rescued. And it's just been a dream of mine to continue to write books and start kind of really diving into that. And I really wanted my first book to be the story of our family adoptions. And as Kurt Skelly said, who wrote the foreword to the book, the story is much more about than just about adoption. It's a story about God's miraculous provision, great answers to prayer. I know it's going to be an encouragement to all of my listeners and friends out there. The book is set to release on September 24th, a Tuesday night in Jacksonville at the Cut It Straight National Conference on Expository Preaching. Cannot wait for that. But right now you can go to bryansams.com/rescued, and there you can pre-order the book and go ahead and pay for it so that when it is launched, it'll be there. And it's also given in pre-launch, I think, at about a 20% discount from the retail price. So it's something you can pick up now. Luke, I really think this is going to be a blessing to some people. I think it's going to help some churches. I'm also excited about the small group study that goes with the book. It's an 8-week video course that you can have a small group leader play a 15-minute video introducing the concepts and then discuss it with his people, his class, excuse me. And I just think it's a real benefit to the church. And of course, I'm just super excited to share our story and tell people what God has done and hope to inspire some hope in the God of wonders and the God of miracles. It's gonna be great.
Yeah. Well, at the time of recording this, I've not been privileged to see an advanced copy or anything like that, because I know you're still kind of working on some of those final edits before you send it off to publish. You've personally shared me some of your story of your adoption stories with your kids, even the story. And I don't know, maybe it is. Even the story of just your actual biological son is actually miraculous. And so I'm looking forward to, you getting the story out there to the world. It's something that you've alluded to many times on the podcast now to get it really out there. And so, bryansams.com/rescue. Check it out. I'm really looking forward to people hearing about it. Well, Bryan, that brings us to kind of our main conversation for today, which when you texted me this title, I was really intrigued. Essentially, I think it was more or less why I'm no longer counting attendance. So let's get into that.
Yeah. And I think I want to take it a little further. I want to maybe say why I quit obsessing with attendance. There is still some attendance taken in our church, mainly within our groups, so that people can know who to follow up with and, some of those things. And there's natural attendance taken like in children's ministry and other things because, they have to check in, and all that. But I don't obsess with it and I don't worry about it. And I don't use it as a measuring rod for whether I feel successful or not. And I think if we were to be honest with ourselves, many churches and many pastors obsess with attendance. And it's how much are we growing this year? I mean, there for the longest time, how to break the next barrier of your church growth. I've even heard this statement that I've challenged on any private conversation that I've had with people. They'll say help things grow. And what they mean by that is they mean it will grow numerically. In other words, if your church is healthy, it will numerically grow. And I want to challenge that idea as an idea, first of all, but then secondly, as an obsession. Because what can happen is, you can go all the way back to episode 2 and 3 of the original Bryan Sam's podcast that became a Church Advance podcast, and you'll hear 2 episodes, Why I Should Be Dead, I think is what it's, part 1 and part 2. My interview with Michael Bennett, who is currently a pastor in Indiana, but was a pastor in Kansas at the time, and how that his obsession with success and numbers nearly almost drove him to suicide. Powerful couple of episodes. If you guys haven't listened to it, maybe we can reference those in the show notes. But it was a sobering conversation. More importantly, it was a sobering experience because Michael ended up leaving the ministry for a season, coming to our church for about 2 years, healed up, got restored, and now he's back in the ministry, pastoring a thriving church in Indiana. And I just am so proud of him for sharing his story, but also he's representative of a much greater issue, and that is, when we were in college, or I was teaching, you were in college. It was a slam. Here would be a common slam for a college student who didn't have his junk together. Okay, here's a common slam: you'll never pastor more than 50.
Yeah.
And so, what did that mean? That meant if you're a loser, if you are fool around, if you don't know how to, make your bed, you're never going to pass. So meaning your allotment in life, if you're a loser, is going to be to pastor a church less than 50.
Well, I'm the biggest loser of them all, Bryan, because I've pastored a church of 0 at this time, So,
Yeah,
man, I was one of those guys.
You're a big loser. But here's the interesting thing about that. It just sets people up for failure. It sets people up for mental health issues. It sets people up for depression. It sets people up for anxiety. It sets people up for the comparison trap. It sets people up to just have incorrect measurements overall about what even is ministry success. I'm just going to admit, I bought into, the numbers game. Every church I was ever a part of before I came to my own church was a large church. In fact, one of them was a near mega church. One of them was, in fact, a mega church. These are churches that I was on staff at, that I was intimately involved with. It was my model. It was what I saw. It was whether it was direct or indirect, it was what was expected. It was what was understood. It was, let's shoot for 1,000. Let's shoot for 2,000. How are we going to break this next barrier? How are we going to get more kids at the college? How are we, and so you're just around it, and you just think this is what it's supposed to be. So I come to our church, dying church, 2016. And what am I immediately thinking? How are we going to grow this church? In fact, the people who called me to come to Harvest Baptist, which is now River City, that was their question. How are you going to help us grow? They did not mean, how are you going to make me closer to Jesus? They meant, how is our old dying church going to start seeing numbers swell again? We did see numbers swell again. Even to this day, our church is 4 or 5 times the size it was when I came. So I'm not saying growth is bad. I'm saying growth is not a goal. I'm not saying that having a large number of people come into your church is inherently evil. It's not. But I'm saying it's a horrible goal. It's a horrible master. It's a horrible way to view ministry overall. It's a bad business altogether.
Yeah.
So for me, I've had to, over the 10 years I've been here, break my obsession with numbers. And some people might say, well, that's a cop-out. You're trying to make an excuse for your small church. I don't think my church is small. It's not by any definition small. We have 2 campuses. Like I said, we have 5, maybe 6 times the amount of people that we had when I came. So I'm not talking about excuses or cop outs, but I'm saying to you, just that what I just shared is not an indication that my church is a solid church or anybody's church is a solid church. So I had to quit obsessing with it. Okay. So let me give you the 6 reasons why I quit obsessing with numbers. Number one, I do not obsess with attendance because attendance is no indication of pastoral success.
Mhm.
There's only one indication of pastoral success. Okay. There's one word. There's a one word indication of pastoral success. It's the only indication of pastoral success, and that is faithfulness. Faithfulness to the text, faithfulness to your wife, faithfulness to your God-given responsibilities. When it's all said and done, God will say, well done, thou good and faithful servant. The only requirement is faithfulness. There's nowhere in Scripture that would tell us that when you are pleasing to God, this is going to happen. But the volume of Scripture is fight your fight, run your race, be faithful in great things and small, and God's great reward is for that. So I think that's number one. I don't want to obsess with numbers because they're no indication of pastoral success. Only faithfulness matters. Number two, attendance is no indication of God's blessing. Meaning that just because a church is large doesn't mean it is not experiencing God's full blessing. And just because a church is small doesn't mean that it's not. This is such a simple analogy. I mean, it's just really easy to understand. If if God's blessing was only in what is fruitful and visible and growing, then Joel Osteen's church is blessed by God.
Mm.
Or any other heretic, any person who, what was the guy, Jim Jones, the guy that took 900 people to Guyana, South America?
Yeah, Kool-Aid guy.
That would be a large church, right? 900 people would be a large church. Not a mega church, but a large church. So this is simple, guys. I'm not trying to overcomplicate this. Crowds never indicate God's blessing.
Yeah.
Never. That
Yeah.
doesn't mean that the frozen chosen and the remnant, the small, well, bless God, we got 10 people, so we're blessed. That doesn't mean that either. What it means is numbers and attendance are no indication of God's blessing or indication of the absence of his blessing.
Yeah.
Easily
Yeah.
seen in heretical teachers, etc. What about Stephen? Stephen was stoned in his first sermon. Never had a church. Jesus, only after all he did, only had 120 people mustered up together in the upper room when he was gone. Okay, it's never an indication of blessing. So you have to just separate yourself from that. Number 3, I stopped obsessing over attendance numbers because large attendance is not the normal for most pastors. The new numbers out are that the average church is less than 70. The median number is 70. That's the new median. That means that 50% of the churches are less than 70, and 50% of the churches are more than 70. And the overwhelming majority of pastors in the world, well, in America, I should say, pastor less than 100. Now, most people do not look at 100 as being a big, successful church. So the point is not that churches can't be bigger or smaller, but that the most people, most pastors, most people listening to this recording pastor a smaller church. So that means that if numbers become our centerpiece, if we're obsessing with numbers, most guys are going to feel like a cosmic failure for their whole life. They're going to be out in Medicine Lodge, Kansas, a town of about 1,000, and they're going to be running 40 or 50 people, and they're going to be faithful to the word, faithful to their wife, faithful to preaching the text, faithful to care for the sick, faithful to minister to the word and care for people, and they're never, ever, ever going to find any satisfaction because they're always going to be thinking, my church should be bigger. I'm a failure. So it's not normal. And here's another really interesting thing that complicates it even more. I read an article a couple of weeks ago. Maybe we can look this up and link to it, but it is this. Most pastors pastor small churches, but most people who attend church in America attend large churches. So the pastoral experience of most people is different than the church people experience of most people.
Yeah.
Really interesting concept.
Wow.
So it just, are you going to let it mess with your mind? Are you going to let it ruin you? Or can you be faithful to God in whatever field he's called you to? And are you willing to embrace that and be okay with that? If you're not willing to be okay with that, you probably shouldn't be a pastor. Number four, attendance is no indication of spiritual health. It does not mean that the people who are coming are spiritually healthy. Our goal should be spiritual. What did Paul say? I languish like a mother giving birth until Christ is formed in you. What was he concerned about? Christ being formed in them. Not that there were more of them, but there were more like Jesus. Okay. When he went on his second missionary journey, first stop back in Lystra, Derbe, in that whole area there, in the Cappadocia, Galatia, that region where he started the first churches, it says, I want to go see how the brethren do. Acts 15. See how they are, not how many they are, but how they are. So discipleship, taking place in the sense of spiritual health. There are different markers for spiritual health than there are for numerical growth. And I think that if we start saying, well, that church is obviously healthy because it's growing, that there could be some correlation, but they're not directly related at all. Number five, I love this. This has been helpful for me. Attendance does not account for normal functions of the church that should be happening, like sending, training, planting, and multiplying.
Cool.
This is what churches should be doing. So does numeric growth line up with the fact that we trained and sent pastors and missionaries and people with those church planting? I mean, I sent, with Aaron a couple of years ago, I sent 12, I think it was 12 or 15 people with him to plant the church with him. That means 12 to 15 people from our church left our church.
Yeah.
To go to another church to help somebody, or that we've sent this family to this country and this family to this country, and these 1, 2, 3, or 4, I think, pastors that have been sent out of our church with their families to go to other churches to be pastors or to church plant. That should be happening, right? And just numbers don't account for that. And so on. Then number 6, excuse me, and then I'd like to talk about a couple of these with you, Luke. Number 6, attendance is not reflective, of real discipleship metrics. What I mean by that, let me give you a quote from Kerry Newhoff. I love what he says about this. And this is an old quote, but I think it's super relevant. Engagement is the new attendance. And we may have mentioned that quote in this podcast before. What does he mean by that? Real discipleship is the real attendance. What is engagement? Engagement is really 3 things. Who is growing, who is giving, and who is serving.
Yeah.
And we usually measure those kinds of things by like, okay, who's engaged in Bible study, connection, who's involved in ministry. Some churches simplify it as they call them groups and teams. I think that's what Carrie Smith does. I love that. Who's involved in groups? Who's studying the Bible? Who's building connectivity and fellowship? Who's reaching their neighbors with the gospel? I spent some time this morning with one of our men who has, he reached, he reached his a coworker, and I mean, the guy is now about to get saved. I mean, he was saying he was an atheist. He's been coming for weeks, and now he's talking about the gospel. I love the story. It's fabulous. It all that shows health. This guy reached his coworker. Obviously, he's talking about the Lord. He's talking about church. And boom, this stuff happens. What about giving? What about serving? What about connectivity? Those are the engagement models. So just attending a church doesn't necessarily reflect anything of discipleship. So those are the 6 reasons why I decided that I was going to unhitch my wagon from attendance metrics and really focus on just focusing on preaching, teaching, and the health of my congregation. And I think that's probably a better way to go. What do you think, Luke?
Yeah, one prominent example kept coming to mind. Actually, it's a story of the history of the church I grew up at. I think it's no secret. I grew up at Franklin Road Baptist Church here in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and worked there for a few years. And my pastor was Mike Norris. Mike Norris just handed actually over the church to his son Joel here earlier this year. Good friends. Well, he tells the story about when he first came to Franklin Road. Franklin Road is a staple of the kind of independent Baptist movement, or at least it was when he came there, and I would say it still is. It's a rich church, 70-year-old church, rich heritage. Anyways, when he came there are other 2 big independent Baptist organizations in Murfreesboro, the Sword of the Lord, or I should say formerly large organizations, the Sword of the Lord and the Bill Rice Ranch. When he first came to the church, he quickly found that his church was made up of 3 primary groups: Sword of the Lord employees, Bill Rice Ranch employees, and bus kids. Now, they would be running 1,200 any given Sunday, but divided into those 3 groups pretty evenly, and so 4, 4, and 4, 400 bus kids, Bill Rice Ranch, Sword employees. And he said the problem with that was obviously it was not that any of those people were particularly bad people or unhealthy people, but there was not organic, natural discipleship happening in the church. And so his mission, and I will say, Mike Norris is an old school guy, but he was able to, over his tenure there, transition that church from being a church that just reached essentially other para-church ministry workers to a church that actually was able to reach people in the community. And from his mouth, those numbers meant nothing, because those numbers were essentially artificial numbers. They weren't metrics of true health and growth in this church. So that's the story that kept coming to mind. And not to dog on the bus ministry too much, but I know many independent Baptist churches now that's the only thing keeping their numbers up, is they're still running buses, and they'll have, half of their weekly attendance or more is buses and so forth. And so then that leads me to a question then, Bryan. Maybe you alluded to it, but are there any metrics, though, that we should be looking at to monitor that health and that engagement, like you were saying?
Yeah. Obviously, we have a record. We have a record of who's in our church. We have a record of the members. We have what we would call an active membership, and I think that's important. But what do? We then take our adult membership, and we then look at how many people are serving in a team. And I think a healthy metric, most people would agree, I think, that north of 50% is an indication of health. So, example, we have let's say a church has 100 adults. I think we have 175 or something like that, adults that are members of our church. How many people serve in a ministry? Anything, worship, nursery, youth, whatever, children. And if you're north of the 50% mark, that's a good indication that your people are engaged in your church. Same thing about giving. How many units of those people do you have more than 50% givers? And that's a good indication that people are bought in, if you will. They're growing, they're wanting to be faithful to the Lord. And the same thing is true of your groups, whatever that looks like. Some people do the more, however you do, Sunday school groups, doesn't matter. But how many people are engaging beyond the Sunday morning public worship gathering? Is your thing on Wednesday night? Is your thing in Sunday school? Is your thing home groups? Whatever it is. How many people do you have engaged? Again, if you're at the 50% mark or north, that's probably a good thing. If you look around, and this would be very indicative of the bus kid kind of model. And of course, the pushback will be, wait a second, everybody's important. That's not what we're talking about. Every soul is important, of course.
I'll take the bus kids.
Yeah, absolutely. I want them here. Absolutely. Every soul matters. We're not even talking about souls here. That's not even the discussion of this topic. This topic is how important are the numbers? When you say how many bodies were on campus and the overemphasis of that, just because you can fill a bus with kids by saying you'll swallow a goldfish alive at the end of the bus day, or that you'll give everybody a popsicle, or that you'll do the one, it used to be when I was a kid, the 100-foot long hot fudge sundae. I don't know if they ever did that where you grew up. That was a big thing, man.
Yeah.
Everybody took their spot on the 100-foot banana split. It was banana split, 100-foot banana split. And I mean, can you imagine how unsanitary that was? I remember my parking lot of my church when I was a kid. They lined a 100-foot banana split, and everybody that came took a spoon and got in there. I mean, we would never do that today. But the point is gimmick based, and is the product, is the pragmatism of it great? Of course it's great. But how many kids that are being reached there are engaged in growing, serving, giving in the long run? That's what
Sure.
That's health.
Yeah.
I'm for every soul that's been saved under any circumstances that God got them to him. Totally great. When we're talking about what's going to keep you sane in ministry, as far as what are you looking for? You're looking for health rather than growth.
Yeah. Well, and before people think that all we're doing is dogging on the bus ministry, that same concept flows into your adults. Is your service every week just some big attraction? Some latest like craze of, we're doing some fill in the blank, like we're doing some, our night at the movie. Which again, I'm not saying all that's wrong, but yeah, I saw, pastors that dress up like certain, movie characters and whatever. Again, like, is your church just living gimmick to gimmick? Because again, to give another bus example to tie that in, I was a bus captain at West Coast Baptist College, had one of the biggest routes out there. And I remember I was trying to get, I was out visiting, trying to get kids to come. And I went up to the door and I was telling every kid, hey, we're giving away $20. Make sure you're there, whatever. And that's what I was always saying. And my friend, you'll remember Nate Stone Street. Nate pulled me aside. He's a pastor now out in California. He pulled me aside. He said, hey, Luke, what you win them with is what you keep them with. And so if that's all you're doing is offering them money and offering them candy, then when you run out of money, when you run out of candy, they won't be back. And it doesn't matter if it's kids, adults, same mentality applies. So just because you've won people in with attraction, because you've got awesome worship, or you've got, again, cool programs and shiny things, doesn't, once you run out of energy for that and ideas and cool creative ideas, and you will, what you won them with is what you're going to keep them with. And so that attendance measurement, I think the conclusion is that not exactly the metric you're looking for health and blessing at your church.
Exactly right. Well, guys, hope this was a help to you, and feel free to give us some feedback, and we'd love to hear from you. God bless you. We'll see you next time on the Church Fans Podcast.